Hey there, welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. This is the space where we bring you Black America's headline news, views, and opinions. I'm Brooke.
I'm Demi.
Peace and love. I'm Nielle. Romeo's out today.
On today's report, we remember the life and legacy of Colin Powell, the first Black U.S. Secretary of State. Stephanie Morales, the first woman to be elected Commonwealth's attorney for the city of Portsmouth, Virginia, and the chief law enforcement officer for the city is here to break down the first day of juror selection for the three men charged in the death of Ahmaud Arbery.
U.S. Congresswoman Karen Bass has officially launched her run for mayor of Los Angeles. The head of Chicago's police union just lost a pretty important battle in his war against the city's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Plus, research connects a stark history of lynchings with cities that still hold on to Confederate monuments. We're going to break that down. And an HBCU just got its biggest alumni gift in school history. We'll show you where.
Soulmates, we have that and so much more. You know why? Because it's our voice and it's our truth. So let's talk about it.
Soulmates, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, the big breaking news of the day, General Colin Powell has died at 84 years old. His family says he died from complications of a breakthrough case of COVID-19 as he was fully vaccinated. But as CNN reports, he was also battling some other health issues, including multiple myeloma, which is a blood cancer that makes it harder for your body to fight infection, as well as Parkinson's. Even if fully vaccinated against COVID-19, those who are immunocompromised are at a greater risk from the virus. Let's talk about a little of Colin Powell's legacy. Obviously, most remembered for his speech at the UN in which he outlined the Bush administration's plan to invade Iraq. You know, I think he has referred to it as one of his biggest regrets. And many people have a hard time, you know, equating more than 500,000 lives lost to someone's regret, because again, that's a lot of lives lost. He was also the youngest Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first Black National Security Advisor, obviously the first Black Secretary of State, a military vet, a longtime military vet. General Lloyd Austin, Secretary now, Lloyd Austin, this morning talking about how this was his mentor. He's been his mentor. He was very sad. George W. Bush, who obviously he was Secretary of State under, talked a bit about today, released a statement talking about the importance of his legacy. Gene Demby, who I quote a lot, he is a host on NPR, and he said this because I think this is something that's interesting. It happens when powerful people die, right? And so he said, plenty of powerful people are charming and polite. That is often a big part of how they amass power and influence in the first place. When they die, the thing worth sitting with and taking stock of isn't how amiable they were, but what they actually did with that power.
Right.
And I thought that was an important thing to kind of take as people talk about legacies. We see this every time.
Yeah. President Biden today released a proclamation, and he called for all the flags to fly half-staff until October 22nd, until sunsets. But I want to talk about Colin Powell, the person, the patriot, and who he was. He was a child of immigrant parents from Jamaica, which is what this country is founded on. He started his military career in the ROTC, right? Something you do in high school, a lot of kids do. He went to the Vietnam War. He served under 4 presidents, Nixon, both Bushes, and he endorsed President Barack Obama both terms as a Republican. And I love the fact that when it came time to the Trump administration and Republicans were scared to call him out, he did. And he denounced the party and he chose country over party. And I think that's what makes him a great patriot of our country, and that his legacy will be long remembered as a patriot more than a Republican or a military person. He was a patriot and represent what it means to be an American.
I mean, you guys have touched on so many great points. First things first, Brooke, I'm really happy that you wanted to make sure our soulmates know that it is important for us to remember, both of you have said this, for us to remember the great things that he has done for for the nation. And it's so hard. The first thing that everyone, like you said online today, everyone has been bringing up Iraq. I feel like that shouldn't be the first thing that you have a family that's also mourning. And so he's a human at the end of the day. I just thought it was so rude of so many people online to just immediately go to Iraq and want to use that as a reason to say negative things and speak ill of the dead. Second point about him denouncing the Republican Party and back to Barack Obama. That was a very big moment. Like you said, Niel, he was very big on the country over politics. And so for that alone, and in his endorsement with Barack Obama, both terms, I think that is enough for the Black community for us to make sure that we remember all of the wonderful things that he has done for the community and all of the accomplishments, Brooke, as you read. And so we're just going to send prayers and thoughts to this family and also remember the importance. There was one more thing I want to announce that a lot of people were saying online. There were so many headlines and a lot of people were upset about this because everyone was talking about, well, he was vaccinated and he still, got COVID-19. Brooke said it in the beginning of her story of some of the other complications that he had. His immune system was already, was already compromised because of some of the other issues that he had with his body. So I don't want this to stop people from wanting to get vaccinated because you think that you can't get, because he still got COVID-19 and vaccinated. I don't want any of our soulmates to think that you still should not get vaccinated because you should.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch on that a little bit because I do think it's important. As soon as the information kind of first came out, the first statement we got was a Facebook post from his family saying he did die of complications of COVID-19. He was fully vaccinated. And then, of course, later, further news comes out. The fact of the matter is there was a fear immediately this morning that this was going to be an example of something that would cause more misinformation, right? The anti-vaxxers would take this and kind of run with it. But he was 84 years old and doing whatever he could, as far as getting vaccinated with the tools that he had available to protect himself from COVID-19. He also had 2 very serious illnesses that just ravish your immune system. And this is unfortunate. I think it also goes to show another example of how we are not out of this. And everybody needs to do whatever they can to protect themselves. This is a dangerous, deadly virus. We're all, I think, doing our best, but at least health-wise, this is an example, at least, of someone using all the tools available to them to try and protect themselves.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to another important story of the day. Actually, in a state that didn't have a hate crime law, right, until this year, where vigilante citizens' arrests were sometimes permitted by the government, 3 white men are set to go on trial for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Arbery, of course, a black man who prosecutors allege was, quote, hunted down and ultimately executed while out for a jog on a Sunday. Big, important news in this case. Jury selection actually started today. This case sparked nationwide protests, sent Georgia lawmakers scrambling to rewrite the state statutes. 1,000 questionnaires were sent out to prospective jurors, okay? About 1 in every 85 eligible residents in Glenn County, Georgia. So Ron Adams is the Glenn County court clerk. He told the Associated Press 1,000. Let's talk about the 3 defendants. Gregory Michael, he's 65 years old, a retired police officer. His son, also on trial for this, Travis McMichael, he is 35 years old, and their neighbor, William Roddy Bryan. He is 52 years old. You can see them all right there on your screen. ABC News is reporting legal experts say they expect graphic details of how the 25-year-old was gunned down to be intertwined with Georgia's long history of racial unrest. Obviously, we all saw the video, and I think one of the biggest points of issue for people at home watching was that it happened so long before such a graphic video was released to the public.
Here to discuss the first day of juror selection is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the Commonwealth and a Commonwealth Attorney of the City of Portsmouth, Virginia. Soulmates, welcome Stephanie Morales. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you and start off this conversation with you. You're a top cop in the city, and the concept of vigilante citizens are reminiscent of those of the past, like slave catchers, KKK members, and lynching squads. Now, since the defendants have referred to Georgia's citizen arrest, which is the same thing as a vigilante, do you think that this will help or hurt the case?
Well, I certainly think that it's going to depend a great deal upon who the jurors are who are selected in this case. So I hope prosecutors are paying very close attention and are asking very pointed questions throughout the voir dire process, which is where they question jurors about certain things. They should ask them about their perspective on exactly what you just brought up. about vigilante justice, about those matters in the past when we were confronted with racism that results in the loss of life of Black people. So hopefully they are being very clear in their lines of questioning. They are paying attention to the past of the jurors. Oftentimes prosecutors will have access to their professions, to where they live, to even their criminal backgrounds, and whether or not they have anything in their past that would speak to their ability to give a fair and just trial to the deceased, Mr. Arbery, and his family, while they are also looking at fairness for all parties involved.
Thank you so much for joining us today here on FOXSOUL's Black Report Now. Georgia has just started to implement hate crimes. Can you talk to us a little bit about the weight hate crimes will hold in criminal cases?
Well, it is very important to be clear about what has been happening in this country as long as it has existed. And that is that we know hate crimes have taken place and they have not gone prosecuted the way the members of our communities are prosecuted every day for all manner of offenses. And so right now, while the state trial is proceeding, I understand that there are federal charges that will go forward in February. But right now, it's important to talk about how this came about. Georgia changed its law, I believe, after the assault and the killing of some Asian women in Georgia. And now we are seeing, states around the country really pay close attention to legislatively what gaps there are to protect members of our community who have been subject to hate crimes for so long. So it is important. But it is also important to lay out that there is a mechanism in existence that has always been in existence, and that is the criminal legal system as it stands. We see members of the Black community, members of Brown community charged with murder and all different types of offenses. And those mechanisms are in place here for prosecutors who know how to prosecute all day, every day, and they can certainly bring everything they have to the table to fight for justice for Ahmaud Arbery and his family in this instance.
Let's talk about voir dire a little bit. Obviously, a very important aspect of this case happening right now. And this is supposed to be a jury of their peers, right? That makes people a little nervous. We're talking about this community, what has been allowed in this community, what is seen as the norm in this community for at least a massive part of this community. So there are going to be some jurors that the prosecution is going to say no thank you to. There are going to be some that the defense says we don't want them there, right? What do you think are going to be the type of red flags that the prosecution may see and say, we want this juror excused?
So again, the questions have to be pointed. Questions should be along the lines of determining whether or not people believe that police officers are more truthful or people who have ties to law enforcement, as my understanding some of these defendants did. Again, those questions about vigilante justice. Do you believe that people have the right to make a citizen's arrest? Do you find people who have taken that sort of action to be heroic in their thought process or in their actions? These questions can be asked and should be asked. And if anyone is, stating to the court that they believe certain people are more trustworthy than others, they need to be removed for cause sometimes. And other times you can use the strikes that you have, that are not for cause to remove people who you think would be problematic. But I think prosecutors should be very strict and paying very close attention to whether any people are racially biased, to whether people are biased towards people who have taken certain career paths, and they should be committed to finding a diverse jury. There is something called a Batson challenge, where criminal defense attorneys usually make motions on behalf of their client if they believe that a potential juror has been struck on the basis of race. And you can also, as a prosecutor, do a reverse Batson challenge, where you challenge a strike on the basis of race. So again, if the prosecutors feel that the defense attorneys are removing anyone on the basis of race, they can do a reverse Batson challenge to fight to make sure that we have a racially diverse jury that is going to be fair in its assessment of this case as they work to reach the proper conclusion in this trial.
We're talking a lot about vigilante justice, right? And we think of people like Emmett Till. We think of lynchings in this country. We think about how white America in the past has took justice into their own hands, and the criminal justice has supported their actions. So with this trial, do you think that the South is actually on trial when it comes to the case and murder of Ahmaud Arbery?
I think this entire country is on trial. And I think, over the course of this past year and a half to 2 years that we have been going through this national pandemic, and we have seen so much racial injustice put on display that our communities have been dealing with all over this country, we have come to a realization that the systemic racism is very real, that it is rampant, and our entire country has taken part in what has led us to this point where people feel that it is okay and that they are able to go and take matters into their own hands and end the lives of other people in our communities who are marginalized, who are Black and brown, and who have been left out and unprotected. And so it is not just the South that is on trial, it is our entire country and the soul of this nation that's on trial. And I hope, again, that we have a representative jury that reflects the makeup of our diverse country, our rich diversity, that will be fair and that will truly use their common sense and evaluate the evidence and find justice for Ahmaud Arbery, because this is a very clear violation of his rights to live. And it's a real danger for our entire country if we don't get this right.
I absolutely agree with you. I want to talk about Ahmaud Arbery's mom for a quick second. She's been very vocal, as she should, and I'm happy that she has. She recently said, what does justice look like for her? And she said justice for her is all three men going to jail for the rest of their lives. She also filed a federal lawsuit that alleges that police in Glenn County, Georgia, and two local prosecutors, they conspired to cover up Arbery's murder and protect the men involved in his death. So how much of this do you think will play out in the trial?
Well, you know, as an attorney, it's important to discuss trial process. A lot of times there are pretrial motions where attorneys will actually go before the judge in advance of the trial to discuss what is relevant and what is appropriate, what would create unfair bias. And this is one of the instances where I think if there are any issues that could come up that are not per se related to the facts as they happen, that could potentially confuse the jury, that could bias any party, this is something that would be appropriate for a pretrial motion. So I'm not familiar with everything that has been done in this case. I know there were some pretrial motions, and the prosecution did move to ensure that nothing about the victim in this matter, Mr. Arbery's past, would be brought in to unfairly prejudice the prosecution's case with the jury. And I'm glad the prosecution, you know, took that necessary step. So we could see more motions like this, pretrial motions, where either the prosecution or the defense could go to the judge in advance to address these matters so that it's not confusing the jury with a whole bunch of objections and things that, you know, would need to be stricken from the record. So I would just keep our, you know, say everyone keep your eyes peeled for those pretrial motions, to basically determine what's relevant and what's not, what would create unfair prejudice. And again, to ensure that the cleanest, the fairest, and the most just trial is had as everyone seeks to do the business of justice, which, you know, in my opinion, is justice for Ahmaud Arbery.
So for so many people, this case is reminiscent of George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, right? Especially before this went to trial, when at that point we had, well, in this case, a dead young Black man. And, you know, the story of people who are alive and charged with the crime. In Trayvon Martin's case, we had a dead Black child, and George Zimmerman's story. For me, the biggest difference seems obvious. It seems to be the video, right? At least before things go to trial and we're getting different stories, just at that point, the big difference seems to be that there's video of this incident. I'm curious for you, from your professional perspective, what are the differences that you see?
So it's important to point out that every single case is different. You know, for me, when I look at these cases, you know, you can evaluate a case and say, well, this is similar and that is different, but every single case has its own different set of circumstances and has its own intricacies. And so when I see, you know, the George Zimmerman trial, and I compare it to the matter here with these three defendants who were charged, I see so many differences that it's hard to look at similarities. But, you know, in this case, the boldness of these individuals to record what they were doing, the idea that this was the right thing for you to do, and the lack of shame, you know, just the lack of hiding, is what stands out to me in this instance. And, you know, after the fact, we have seen some behaviors from George Zimmerman where he seemed to be very bold in his actions as well. But, you know, in this instance, the amount of time that Mr. Arbery ran and the distance that he ran, and there have been some demonstrations that have been put together by different outlets of the way he was being chased between the vehicle and pinned in. It is one of the most disturbing things, and all of these matters are disturbing, but this is so disturbing that we have not only a loss of life of this gentleman who deserved the right to be free of any of this, but the sheer amount of time that he was terrorized. and the great lengths that these individuals went to do so, and the fact that they were so brazen as to record it, it really is something that, you know, we have not often seen, and is so disturbing, that I hope, again, that we have a jury in this matter that is going to evaluate every single piece of evidence, use their common sense and apply it to the law, and reach the proper outcome in this matter.
Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back as we continue the conversation with this trial. And Soulmates, if you didn't know, Stephanie Morales is one of the few prosecutors in this country that has prosecuted an officer for killing a person of color. So she will be back.
Thank you.
On to our next story here. A Texas deputy who was fatally shot outside of a Houston bar. He had just returned from paternity leave. Deputy Kareem Atkins, he leaves behind a wife and an infant who was only a few months old. Constable Mark Herman of Harris County Precinct 4, he stated a gunman came out of nowhere and fired on Atkins and two other deputies while they were trying to detain someone early Saturday. The two additional deputies, Daryl Garrett as well as Joaquin Barthen, they were also injured. He added deputies Atkins, Garrett, and Barthen were true law enforcement heroes that were cowardly ambushed while serving and protecting their community. Garrett was in ICU after he was shot in the back and underwent surgery. Barthen, who rushed to the parking lot to help the other two deputies, was immediately shot and immobilized. This was a very, very, very sad story. So Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo, she also asked for Governor Greg Abbott to grant the request to have flags lowered a half staff as well for Atkins. And also what's really scary about this is that, you know, when you have family members who are police officers, it really puts it in perspective. This is the part of the job, having family members who are police officers, or knowing a police officer that we don't get a chance to talk about. Your family not getting a chance to return home. You have people, and not to justify any actions done to a police officer, but you have people who are angry, people who are hurting, people that are losing lives, and they're afraid of police, and they don't respect the police regardless of what color you are. And so it makes police officers, again, no matter what color you are, it makes police officers so vulnerable to so much crime. And when you think about someone in your own family, he had just had a baby, it is just so heartbreaking to think of your husband leaving and then he not return home one day.
Yeah. It's tragic.
Let's move on to our next story. This is an interesting story happening in Pennsylvania. The Philadelphia City Council has passed a bill banning police officers from pulling drivers over for minor traffic violations. The bill now goes to Mayor Jim Kenney's desk, along with another driving equity bill that would create a public database listing information on traffic stops. Philly Voice reports supporters are hopeful the legislation will promote equity on the road and improve relationships between police and community members by eliminating discriminatory traffic stops. Data shows Philadelphia police pull over a disproportionate number of black drivers for minor traffic violations. Black drivers make up 72% of motor vehicle stops, but comprise just 42% of the city's population. And so these are going to be things like driving without an inspection sticker, having a broken taillight. In other cities, the push for this would include having something obstructing your view partially, like something hanging from the rear view mirror, windows that are too tinted, things like that. This does not include things that put public safety in jeopardy. So, for instance, if you speed through a stop sign, you'll still get pulled over. Mm-hmm. If you are speeding on the freeway, on the highway, you can still get pulled over, and police are still allowed to use their discretion, which I'll come back to that in a second. But activists say this right here, this is an effort to stop what are called pretext stops. Many people also refer to that as driving while black. So essentially, it's the practice of pulling someone over for a minor traffic violation and using that situation as an excuse to search their vehicle for illegal guns, illegal weapons, looking for drugs, things like that. Pull them out, get them searched. And it's interesting because when I saw this story, I saw a lot of people talking about it, and I saw a long conversation of people talking about how they have trauma. They have a history of, one time I was driving, I didn't do anything, I got pulled over, they made me get out of the car, they patted me down, and like stories like that. They didn't find anything, I didn't have anything in my car. And I think it was striking to me how many people shared that exact same experience. This is a nationwide conversation. So attorney Dr. Rebecca Kavanaugh, she's a civil rights attorney. She actually pointed out, again, that the discretion here means that pretext stops will not be fully eliminated, and many are still pushing for an overall approach when it comes to policing in Philadelphia and nationwide.
Well, this is what police reform looks like. So we talk about we didn't get the Justice for George Floyd bill passed, right, soulmates? So now we're putting it in the hands of the state and the local levels, and this is a reflection of that. We know that Black people lose their lives for getting pulled over for having an air freshener sticker in their mirror, right? We know that they get pulled over for things and then charged get slapped on them. So I think this is what we talk about when we say police reform, law enforcement reform. This is a good example, and other states should follow suit, because the only people that get victimized by the story that Brooke just read was people of color.
You know, I think that it's important to note, Niel, you make a great point about a low-level offense like a tag. I'm terrified of getting pulled over by the police for any reason, but you're right that we do. You know, people have definitely died when getting pulled over for something as small as a tag or registration. But I don't know if I feel strongly enough about this being justice reform, in my opinion, because I feel like you think about how much money, say a person, you know, it's not a fatal stop, right? Just think about how much money they make by that last ratio that Brooke read in her story, how much money you make by pulling over this amount of people. You're going to lose that money. They're not going to be able to make that money. So I feel like they're not going to just back off all the way. Brooke, you also said that they can use their discretion. So I still feel like they're going to find a way to make the money from those traffic stops that they were doing. So that means what's going to happen? I feel like there's just something else. I don't feel like they're just going to back off all the way. They're still going to use their discretion and find a way to still pull us over. So I don't know. I just feel like there's just something else coming with it.
That is actually exactly what Dr. Kavanaugh actually said. She said, you know, she wants to celebrate this, but the fact of the matter is that she's worried about her clients. She works as a public defender in New York City, and she said that what happens is, I want to give her exact quote here because I think that she's an important resource here, and she said that her hesitation is that she knows in so many of her own cases, the pretext for a traffic stop will end up being something like ignoring a stop sign or speeding. And so she says that this may just force police to become more creative, saying anytime police have discretion, they will abuse it. Absolutely. And that is the argument of police abolitionists, saying that you have to end the system in order to see any sort of change. Of course, you know, police reformists say this is something. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, something is better than nothing. So I hear your hesitation, but to sit and do nothing like Congress is doing is not an answer. So something is better than nothing. We'll continue this conversation. Former Congressional Black Caucus Chair Rep. Karen Bass officially kicked off her campaign for mayor of Los Angeles Saturday and reiterated her pledge of solving homelessness if elected. Now, former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, who announced his endorsement of Bass on Friday, was among other speakers, along with Rep. Judy Chu and Emmy Grammy-winning comedian Tiffany Haddish, who spoke and recounted her upbringing here in Los Angeles when she was in foster care and being homeless. Now, Bass, if elected, would be Los Angeles' first Black female mayor and the second Black mayor after Tom Bradley, who was mayor from 1973 to 1993.